When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. Jimi Hendrix. And I think that it's something that we really need to think about in our society today. There is not enough love going around. We are consumed and obsessed with the love of power, when what we should be consumed and obsessed with is the power of love. And I'm talking about racism. And I think that it's something that has to be discussed. I didn't really want to talk about it, but the more I looked into it, the more I felt like I need to bring it up. And what the Bible has to say about it, and what Jesus has to say about it, and put it in some perspective. The world's upside down right now. 1,000 people a day are dying from coronavirus, and by all accounts, that's probably a low number. It's probably much more than that. There are protests going on. George Floyd was ruthlessly killed. There are riots going on, looting going on. It's crazy out there. And just as a side note, I'm tired of people talking about the rioting and the looting like that is the main problem. If all you want to talk about is rioting and looting, you need to stop talking, because that's not the important issue right now. The main thing we should be talking about is rampant racism in the United States. So, when we talk about it from a biblical perspective, which I think is important to do, the Bible has lots to say about treating people right. It's important to note that in the first century, when Jesus was alive, there was rampant racism in Israel. The Israelites didn't like people who weren't Israelites. They felt oppressed, they didn't like the Romans, and they hated the Samaritans. And they didn't believe that God was for those other people. God was for the Hebrews. And so our first text today from the Bible is Jesus, and Jesus specifically addresses prejudice against the Romans and prejudice against the Samaritans, and we're going to look at both of those today. In Matthew 8, starting in verse 5, this is the faith of a centurion. Let's just read through this really quick, 5 through verse 13. When he entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly." And Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." But the centurion replied, "Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes. And to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, "Truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And to the centurions Jesus said, "Go, let it be done for you as you have believed." And the servant was healed at that very moment. Here Jesus says that God is for our enemies. The Roman government, a Roman centurion walking up, I'm sure the disciples were shaking in their boots that a Roman centurion was coming up, because they were afraid of him. They believed him because of who he was and how he was dressed and the color of his skin. Remember, Jesus is Jewish, so he's brown, like all the other disciples. The centurion, if he's Roman, he's white. And they were afraid of that. They were afraid of him only because of his skin and because he was Roman, not necessarily because of his personality. We know here that he is not someone who was coming to harm them, to bring any pain to them, but I'm sure that they were frightened of it. It doesn't say that in the Bible. But the fact that Jesus tells his followers, his disciples, and everybody else who's around, remember, almost always, there's more than just the 12 guys. There's other people. There's other groupies, if you will, following Jesus around. And he says There will be many people who come from the east and the west and all these other places that will end up eating at the table of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, essentially saying they'll be in heaven. Where there's lots of people around here who claim to be faithful Jews that are going to be sent out to the place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. I think that's something really important to talk about here. There are lots of Christians who also are the same way, and people that we're afraid of, that we don't think necessarily our God is for. I just smashed a bug right on my Bible. Gross. And so there's Jesus taking an active view on something that is anti-racist. The other one we'll look at is in John 4. You guys know this story. You may not know the centurion one so well, but it's an important one. But everybody knows, well, most Christians know, if you were raised in church and went to Sunday school, you know the story of the woman at the well. It's a common story. I've heard it preached on so many different ways. There was so much to come from this one chapter in John 4. Just from that story. There are so many angles you can take on it. But the bottom line is, they're in Samaria. They're at a town in Samaria. A woman comes out who is a Samaritan, and Jesus witnesses to her. He talks to her. He's nice to her. He shows the love of God to her, and she's a Samaritan. Jews hate Samaritans because they're Samaritans, not because of any other reason. Not because they're the enemy, like with the Roman centurion. They just hate Samaritans. And I've talked about this in other Bible studies. You can look at those. You can look it up. You can check with me about it. They are racist against Samaritans. And so Jesus talks to her, preaches to her, tells her he's the Messiah, in fact. And I think it's important to bring up this, and I'm only going to read a couple verses from this story. And the first one's not till at the end. He's already told the Samaritan woman that he has water, that he'll never thirst again, all of that. So verse 27 of chapter 4, just then his disciples came back. They were off buying food, so he's by himself with this woman. Just then his disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why are you talking with her?" That's what they wanted to say, though. I think that's the reason that's in there. I think that's the reason John puts that in there. The response normally would be, Jesus, what are you doing? Why are you talking to the Samaritan woman? Don't you know? Of course you know. We don't talk to Samaritans. Samaritans are bad because they're Samaritans. And Jesus says, no, the gospel is for her. She goes into town. She tells people she's like the first missionary to a foreign place. I know Samaria is right in the middle of Israel, but the world's much smaller then. So here's the first foreign missionary, is this woman from Samaria. Then we look at verse 39 at the end of the story. Many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did, that's what she said. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. So not only does Jesus talk to the Samaritan woman, he accepts the hospitality of the Samaritans and stays there and preaches to them and teaches to them, giving an example to these disciples who later on will be going out to all of the world. This is the example that he gives, that the gospel that he is bringing is truly for everyone. It's not just for us. And so everyone should be included. Everyone should be loved. Everyone should be treated the same in the eyes of God. Everyone is God's child. God loves everybody equally. And so what we have going on in America today is racism, and it's obviously there. If you think that it's not there over the last couple of weeks, then you're not paying attention. It is a problem. So I was looking up verses, and I thought, you know what, I should look up and see if there's what other people that I respect have to say about it. And I came up with 3 One's for one I'll do later. I came up with two for right now. Kyle Idleman, who's written wonderful Bible study books. Not a Fan is a great one. Grace is Greater, Aha. These are wonderful Bible study books. Here's what he says. Denial of racism is racism itself. So if you think that there's not real racism, then you're a racist. Sorry. I agree with Kyle Idleman. Jen Hatmaker, also the writer of The Seven Experiment and many other great Bible study books, and I just love her, says, if we are not anti-racist, we are racist. Meaning if we're not actively doing something about racism, then we're racist. Tough words, but I think they're true. And I think that goes back to that whole, we want to talk about the rioting and the looting because we don't want to talk about racism. Oh good, we can grab onto this. Don't think I'm for rioting and looting. Of course, I think it's terrible. The people should be put in jail. They should be prosecuted. But it is not the discussion we need to be having around the water cooler. So I found some good verses about doing the right thing, Spike Lee says. And I wrote them down, so we don't have to flip through the whole Bible on this, but I'll put them up on the video. The first one's Ephesians 4:31. Paul tells us, let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. All those things, bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, slander, and malice, put away. Slander, which is a big one, which means we don't want to talk bad about other people no matter what the color of their skin is. The second verse is Romans 12:21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Just be good to people. Be nice to people. Love people. That's what being a Christian means. 2 Thessalonians 3:13. As for you, brothers, do not grow weary in doing good. I wrote a post about this some time back. You can look it up on Different Way to Worship if you want. Sometimes doing good wears you out. It's just like, have I done enough? Here Paul tells you, no, you haven't. Don't ever grow weary in doing the right thing. Never grow weary in treating people right, in treating people well, in taking care of people, in standing up for people. The fourth one is James 2:9. But if you show partiality, you are committing a sin and are convicted by law as transgressors. Partiality means treating other people differently than you treat these people, whether it's by the color of their skin or whatever, any partiality. But in this case, we're talking about racism. So if you treat people of different skin colors differently, you are sinning. I'm just reading from the Bible, guys. The last one's my favorite, and it's words to truly live by. So pay attention. Psalms 37:3. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Trust in the Lord and do good. Trust in the Lord and do good. Those are 7 words. And basically what that does, what that's right there, I know it's from the Old Testament, but trust in the Lord and do good, that is Christianity in 7 words. Trust in the Lord and do good. So here's your verse for you to memorize today and hold on to and keep with you as you walk through this week and walk through the rest of your life. Trust in the Lord, do good. Trust in the Lord, do good. I can't say it enough times, and I'll stop saying it now except for one more time. Trust in the Lord and do good. And this is where I get a quote from Beth Moore. I love Beth Moore. Beth Moore has changed my life in so many ways with the Bible studies that she has. And the quote is this. And this is about, she's talking specifically about racism now. Do not shrink back in cowardice. Be bold. Be clear. Do not assume people know where you stand. Do not shrink back in cowardice. Be bold and be clear. Do not assume people know where you stand. This is the same that goes along with what the Jen Hatmaker says. It has to do with treating people fairly. It means that if you're not anti-racist, you're racist. So don't just be sitting back and not talking about it. Don't ignore it. The fact that we've ignored it for so long is the reason it's gotten to where it's gotten today. Trust in the Lord and do good. Trust in the Lord and do good. Be bold. Be clear about where you stand. If we ignore it, we're just asking for more problems. As we close today, Joel Chandler Harris, great writer, he wrote the Uncle Remus stories about Brer Rabbit. I'm sure you guys know those stories or have heard of them or are familiar with them. He had a quote that says, you can't run away from trouble. Can't run away from trouble. Ain't no place that far. So when we ignore it, we can never get away from it. You can't run away from trouble. Ain't no place that far. You'll never get away from it. Let's say a word of prayer and then we'll close. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for giving us the power to stand up to the bad in the world, to the evil in the world. Obviously, we've seen, Lord, in the past few weeks, there is real evil in the world, specifically toward people of different colors. Lord, help us to be bold and be clear that we believe that they should be treated the same and that they deserve the same rights as everyone else. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, it's Saturday, so I got a huge list of stuff to do. I'm sure I'll mow. I mow every day, it seems like. I want to close with one thing, one other verse. One time, that we know of in the Bible, Jesus got really mad about something, about injustice. And I'm going to read this to you, and that's what I'll close with. And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying, is it not written, my house shall be called the house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. Something to think about, right? Black Lives Matter. Keep it weird.